Somewhere in Scandinavia, around 980 CE, there is a man standing at the edge of a battlefield who should be afraid. By every rational measurement of the situation, he should be terrified. The enemy outnumbers his group. The weapons are real. The outcome is genuinely unclear. His heart should be hammering. His palms should be wet. His brain should be screaming the same thing that every mammalian brain has screamed at this particular moment for the entire history of the species. Run. Get out. This is not survivable. Go. Instead, he bites his shield, not symbolically, not ritually, literally, bites through the wooden rim of it with his actual teeth. His eyes have gone somewhere else. He's not looking at the enemy. He's not looking at anything in particular. He's looking through everything. He has been screaming for the last 3 minutes. Not war cries, not tactical communication, just noise. Continuous, animal, unself-conscious noise. And he hasn't been hit yet. But here's the thing. It wouldn't matter if he had. Because right now, in this exact moment, there is nothing in this man's brain that is registering pain the way a brain is supposed to register it. The signal is getting scrambled somewhere between the wound and the consciousness. Something has unplugged the alarm. The medieval Norse chroniclers who wrote about men like this called them Berserkers. And for the next 12 centuries, historians, folklorists, neuroscientists, and every Viking enthusiast with a YouTube channel have argued about what made them work. What turned a regular Norse warrior into something that didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't register a sword wound as a reason to slow down? What was the mechanism? What was the switch? Most people, if you ask them, will tell you, magic mushrooms. And they are about 240 years too late, and 100% wrong. Before we get to what it actually was, and what's buried in a Danish grave that proves it, tap the notification bell right now, because this is the kind of history that gets buried on purpose. And I'm not done digging. The mushroom myth. How a wrong answer outlived its inventor. By 240 years. Here is how a bad idea becomes conventional wisdom. The year is 1784. A Swedish physician and pastor named Samuel Odman is sitting at his desk, interested in the berserker problem, and he makes a connection that feels brilliant in the moment. There's a mushroom, Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric, the red one with the white spots. The one that looks exactly like something a cartoon character would use to access a magical realm. It's known to be psychoactive. Siberian shamans use it in rituals. It grows in northern forests. The Vikings were in northern forests. Therefore, berserkers were on fly agaric mushroom. Udman publishes this theory. People like it. It has a certain story logic to it. The image is vivid. Fierce Norse warriors eating glowing red mushrooms before battle like some pre-industrial energy drink. The theory spreads. Books repeat it. Documentaries repeat the books. Internet comment sections repeat the documentaries. By the 21st century, the Amanita muscaria berserker theory is just what people think, a settled answer to a settled question. Case closed. Except nobody who believed it had actually checked the pharmacology. Here's what fly agaric actually does. Its primary psychoactive compounds, ibotenic acid and muscimol, act on GABA receptors in the brain. The effects. Sedation, dreamlike visions, vivid hallucinations of a fairly calm, dissociative quality. In Siberian shamanic contexts, the experience is described as deeply introspective and spiritually immersive. People become drowsy, they see things, they feel a sense of being transported somewhere else. In overdose cases, they vomit extensively and become unresponsive. None of that is bites through a shield. None of that is charges at an armed enemy without armor while screaming. None of that is the precise, specific profile described in every single Norse saga account of berserker behavior. And here's the geographic problem on top of the pharmacological one. Fly agaric doesn't grow in dense, reliable concentrations across Scandinavia the way the theory requires. The idea that Viking war leaders were routinely sourcing, drying, and dosing elite warriors with a mushroom that doesn't grow abundantly in their region, for a psychoactive effect that produces sedation rather than combat rage, doesn't hold. It never held. It just looked good enough that nobody bothered to check. Karsten Fatur checked. In 2019, Fatur, an ethnobotanist at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, published a paper in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology called Sagas of the Solanaceae, speculative ethnobotanical perspectives on the Norse berserkers. He went through every aspect of the Amanita muscaria theory, compared it methodically against the pharmacological evidence and the Norse textual sources, and dismantled it piece by piece. The wrong answer had survived 235 years. Fatur gave it about 15 pages. And then he proposed the right one. It's not exotic. That's the first thing that's going to disappoint you about this. If you're imagining a rare, mystical, hard-to-find substance that required dangerous expeditions into specific forests at specific lunar phases to harvest, adjust the image. Because Hyoscyamine niger doesn't require any of that. It grows in ditches. It grows along roads. It grows in disturbed soil, on the edges of fields, near settlement areas, along coastlines. In Iron Age and Viking Age Scandinavia, it wasn't rare, it was around. The plant we're talking about is small and weedy and unremarkable looking, yellow flowers with dark purple veins, and slightly hairy stems, a faintly unpleasant smell, the kind of plant you'd walk past 100 times without noticing unless you specifically knew what to look for. It goes by many names: black henbane, stinking nightshade, hogbane, poison tobacco, fetid nightshade. None of these are names that inspire confidence. All of them are accurate. Hyoscyamine niger is a member of the Solanaceae family, the nightshades, the same botanical family that includes tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, tobacco, mandrake, and belladonna, which means it shares something important with all of those plants. It produces alkaloids. Specifically, it produces three: hyoscyamine, scopolamine, and atropine, tropane alkaloids, the same class of compounds found in belladonna, the same class of compounds used in medicine for centuries for pain relief, pre-surgical sedation, and treatment of respiratory ailments, and the same class of compounds that, at a combat-appropriate recreational dose, does something very specific to the human brain that no fly agaric mushroom has ever reliably done. It creates rage. Fatur cross-referenced the clinical pharmacological literature on anticholinergic toxicity, what happens to people who ingest hyoscyamine and scopolamine in quantity, with the saga descriptions of berserker behavior. The match is not approximate, it is point for point. The sagas describe berserkers as entering a trance-like state, exhibiting uncontrollable rage and heightened aggression, unable to distinguish friend from enemy. There are multiple accounts of berserkers attacking their own allies, feeling no pain from wounds, screaming and howling, displaying superhuman-seeming strength and endurance, experiencing a post-battle collapse into profound weakness and exhaustion lasting hours or days. Clinical reports of anticholinergic poisoning from hyoscyamine and scopolamine, documented across the modern medical literature, describe agitation and combativeness at moderate doses, frequently escalating to uncontrollable aggression, prosopagnosia, face blindness, at moderate to high doses, in which the individual cannot reliably recognize faces, including faces they know. Multiple clinical reports document patients attacking medical staff trying to help them, destroying equipment, fighting in complete disorientation about who is friend and who is threat, complete analgesia, inability to feel pain, and a well-documented post-episode crash of profound exhaustion and weakness once the anticholinergic syndrome resolves. The warriors who couldn't be stopped and then collapsed afterward and needed days to recover. It's in the sagas. It's in the pharmacology textbooks. It's the same substance. The mechanism is straightforward. Scopolamine and hyoscyamine block acetylcholine receptors in the central and peripheral nervous system. Acetylcholine is critical for normal pain signaling, normal fear response, and normal cognitive processing of sensory information, including facial recognition. When those receptors are blocked, the normal inhibitory processes that govern fear, pain assessment, and rational target identification all stop working simultaneously. The berserker isn't courageous. The berserker isn't spiritually transformed. The berserker's brain has had its threat processing circuitry chemically disabled. The reason he charges into a line of armed men without apparent fear is that the neurological machinery that generates fear is currently offline. The reason he doesn't stop when he's wounded is that the pain signal isn't getting through. And the reason he sometimes kills his own allies is that his face recognition system has been pharmacologically switched off and everyone looks the same. This isn't mythology, it's neuropharmacology. And the dose that produces this effect doesn't require a large amount of plant material, because Hyoscyamine niger is genuinely toxic. It grows in Scandinavian ditches. It was known in the region. And here's the part where archaeology enters the room and the whole theory stops being theoretical. Fyrkat, northern Denmark, a circular ring fortress near present-day Hobro, built around 980 CE, believed to be part of Harald Bluetooth's campaign to consolidate control over Jutland. Inside the circular earthwork walls, 16 longhouses. Outside the northeastern gate, a cemetery, at least 30 graves. And in that cemetery, grave 4, the one that archaeologists in the late 1950s and subsequent decades kept coming back to because of what was inside it. The woman buried in grave 4 was not ordinary. The burial makes that immediately clear. She wasn't placed in the earth in the standard Viking fashion. She was buried in the body of a horse-drawn wagon, a practice reserved for the highest status individuals in Viking society, male or female. Her clothing was embroidered with gold thread. Her jewelry included silver toe rings, of which only 2 examples have ever been found from the entire Viking world. She came from somewhere with connections to Gotland, Finland, and Russia, based on the origin points of objects buried with her. She was approximately 170 centimeters tall, and she was buried with a specific set of objects that, taken individually, each raise an eyebrow, but taken together tell a very precise story about what this woman did and who she was in the living world. Iron staff with bronze fittings, a heavy, ornate rod, long dismissed by early archaeologists as a cooking spit, before trace analysis and contextual study proved it was a ritual implement. The Völva's staff, the wand that gives the word its meaning. Völva probably derives from völ, meaning staff or wand bearer. The woman who carries the wand is the woman who performs Seiðr, the Norse ecstatic ritual in which a practitioner enters a trance state to access prophetic knowledge and interact with other realms. A miniature throne-shaped pendant, likely representing the Seiðr, the elevated ritual seat from which the Völva conducted her work. A box containing owl pellets and small animal bones, a copper pot with traces of fat, the kind of fat that would be used as a base for a preparation, a salve, a compound that needed a carrier to be absorbed through the skin, and a small leather pouch containing hundreds of seeds that were identified by botanical analysis as Hyoscyamine niger, black henbane, in a purse buried with a woman whose entire grave context identifies her as the highest status ritual practitioner in her community. Seeds of the exact plant that produces the exact pharmacological effect that matches the exact behavioral description of the exact type of warrior this community's warriors were described as. If this sounds too specific to be an accident, the Fyrkat burial is documented at Denmark's National Museum. Full excavation records and analysis by Peter Pence et al. 2009 are in the description. The copper pot with fat traces adds the delivery mechanism. Henbane seeds thrown directly onto a fire produce hallucinogenic smoke, enough scopolamine and hyoscyamine in the smoke to alter perception in a closed space. But grinding the seeds, extracting the alkaloids into fat, and producing an ointment that can be applied to the skin is more controllable, more dosable, more suitable for a ritual practitioner who needs to administer a specific effect at a specific moment before a specific event, like, say, a battle. And the Völva, this specific woman, buried in this specific way, with these specific objects, was in a position to do exactly that. She had the seeds, she had the fat, she had the copper pot. She was buried at a military fortress, and she was buried with a ritual staff that in Norse tradition represents access to altered states of consciousness, both self-induced and administered to others. Fatur, commenting on this burial to the Viking Herald. There was an archaeological site in Denmark dating to about 980 that included the remains of a woman thought to be a priestess or shaman, based on her clothing, jewelry, and grave goods. It is likely that the priestess would have distributed these seeds among the Berserkers during rituals before battle. She didn't fight, but she was the most important person in every battle. She was the one who made the Berserkers work, the Völva, not a witch, the pharmacist. Let's be precise about who this woman was, because the word priestess undersells it, and the word witch oversells the mystery and loses the practical function. The Völva in Norse society held a specific and powerful social role. She was a seeress, a practitioner of Seiðr, who could enter trance states to access prophetic knowledge, influence outcomes, and communicate with forces beyond the ordinary. The most famous Völva in all of Norse mythology was summoned by Odin himself to foretell the events of Ragnarok in the poem Völuspa. The god of the Norse pantheon needed her knowledge, not the other way around. These women were not marginal figures. They traveled, they were received by kings, they performed their rituals publicly, and they were very well compensated. The grave goods at Fyrkat and at other high-status Völva burials across Scandinavia, Köpingsvik in Öland, Sweden, an Iron Age grave in Isokuro, Finland, consistently show women buried with imported objects, precious metals, and exotic materials from locations hundreds of kilometers from where they died. These women moved, they were valued, they were paid in goods that traveled long distances. They were also, based on everything the archaeology shows, the people who understood the plants, not as a matter of folk wisdom or superstition, as a functional technical knowledge. The Völva knew which plants entered trance states, and how to dose them, and how to administer them, in which form, for which purpose. For herself, in ritual, henbane smoke or applied salve to enter the Seiðr trance. For warriors before battle, seeds administered in a way that would produce the specific profile of uncontrollable rage, pain tolerance, and disorientation that turned a regular warrior into a berserker. So, the fat in the copper pot at Fyrkat is not a cooking accident. It is the raw material of pharmaceutical preparation by the woman who understood the chemistry, understood it empirically, without the modern vocabulary, but with 100% operational competence. This is the system. The Viking berserker is not a spiritual transformation. He is not touched by Odin directly in some mystical way. He is a warrior who received a specific controlled dose of a specific anticholinergic compound from a specific practitioner who understood its effects, at a specific moment before a specific battle. The warfare technology of the Viking Age included this as a deliberate tactical component. The Völva was part of the military logistics. The plant was the mechanism. And for centuries, the mechanism was hiding in plain sight in a weedy, unremarkable, slightly foul-smelling plant that grows in Scandinavian ditches, not a rare forest mushroom, a ditchweed, one that you could step on without noticing. Now we need to talk about something that the magic mushroom theory never had to explain, because it was never coherent enough to get to this part of the story. If Henbane was the berserker substance, and if it was available in Scandinavian ditches, and if the Völva network understood its properties and administered it ritually before battle, what was everyone else doing with it? Just the warrior ceremony, or something more widespread, something considerably more widespread? Medieval European beer, before the late 15th and early 16th centuries, was not made with hops. Hops, the plant that gives modern beer its bitter, preserving quality, only became standard in brewing gradually over the 14th and 15th centuries, replacing an older herbal mixture called gruit. Gruit was a blend of plants used to flavor, preserve, and add character to ale. The composition varied by region and by brewer, but across much of northern and central Europe, gruit regularly included yarrow, sweet gale, mugwort, marsh rosemary, and black henbane, specifically known in German as Bilsenkreut, literally henbane herb, and believed by some linguistic historians to be the origin of the name of Pilsen, the Czech town whose name may be etymologically connected to the plant that once flavored early local beers before hops replaced it. A 550-year-old Celtic beer recipe found in Germany called for henbane as an ingredient. Neolithic beer residues at Skara Brae in Scotland showed traces of henbane-containing plant material. Henbane in medieval ale wasn't a rarity, it was a feature, and it was a feature with a practical commercial benefit that brewer after brewer discovered independently without necessarily knowing the pharmacology. Henbane's anticholinergic effects caused severe dry mouth, intense, immediate, persistent thirst. The more henbane in your ale, the thirstier your customers became after drinking it, the more ale they bought. Medieval tavern owners were, by accident or by design, selling a product whose active ingredient made you buy more of the product. The first subscription-based business model, the problem was that makes you buy more ale and makes you dangerously insane, are not separated by a large margin when the active compounds are scopolamine and hyoscyamine. Medieval records of people losing their minds in taverns, exhibiting extreme aggression, wandering into streets in states of complete delirium, had a pattern. The henbane beer problem was real and documented and eventually impossible to ignore. So in 1516, Duke Wilhelm IV of Bavaria sat down and wrote the Reinheitsgebot, the German beer purity law. It is still celebrated today. Germany's breweries mark its April 23 anniversary with festivals and subsidized pints. It is presented as a quality control regulation. Beer must be made from only barley, water, and hops. Clean, simple, honest. What the anniversary celebrations tend not to emphasize is the specific context of what the Reinheitsgebot was banning. The law explicitly suppressed the use of plants associated with pagan rituals and potential health risks, including henbane, belladonna, and wormwood. The purity law was, among other things, a psychoactive substance ban. Duke Wilhelm IV of Bavaria made it illegal to add henbane to beer because people were going dangerously insane in taverns on henbane ale, and the church was extremely unhappy about the connection between the plant and pre-Christian Norse ritual practice. The 1516 Reinheitsgebot is publicly documented history. The text and its context around henbane suppression are in the description links if you want to verify. After 1516, henbane disappeared from mainstream European beer. Hops became the universal standard, and the paper trail connecting European peasants and Vikings and Celtic brewers and Roman fortress surgeons to the same plant got buried under 5 centuries of hop-flavored modern brewing. The plant became a footnote, then it became obscure. Then, when people started looking for the berserker drug in the popular imagination, they went to the mushroom, because the mushroom looked more exotic, more mysterious, more suitable to the Viking aesthetic. A red-capped forest mushroom sounds like a Viking drug. A small weedy plant with a yellow flower that also ended up in medieval tavern ale sounds like a historical accident, which is exactly how this stayed hidden for as long as it did. What the whole system looked like. Let's assemble it now, because the individual pieces are interesting, but the complete picture is extraordinary. The Viking war system, at its most sophisticated, included a specialized pharmacological component managed by ritual practitioners of the highest social status. The Völva, a traveling seeress of sufficient reputation to be received by kings and compensated with luxury goods from across the known world, possessed working knowledge of Hyoscyamine. She knew its properties, she knew its delivery methods, she knew the difference between the dose that produced a trance suitable for Seiðr ritual and the dose that produced the anticholinergic combat rage state described in every saga account of berserker behavior. She carried the seeds in a leather pouch. She had the copper pot and the fat for salve preparation. She traveled with military camps as a tactical resource. And before the battle where berserkers would be deployed, she administered the substance. The warriors on it felt nothing that would normally stop a warrior. They felt no fear, because the neurological circuit that generates fear was offline. They felt no pain from wounds, because the pain signaling pathway was blocked. They had no clear friend or foe discrimination, because their face recognition systems were pharmacologically disabled. They were genuinely more dangerous than an undrugged opponent of equal physical capacity. Not because of spiritual transformation, but because their damage-assessing systems had been switched off. The battlefield advantage was real. The mechanism was chemistry. The chemist was the woman buried at Fyrkat with a pouch of seeds, a copper pot, a ritual staff, and enough grave goods to indicate that her community considered her services worth more than almost anyone else's. And when the battle ended and the Henbane wore off, the berserker collapsed. The sagas describe this. The profound exhaustion and weakness after the berserker state ended, sometimes lasting days. Anticholinergic syndrome recovery produces exactly this. The crash after the acetylcholine receptors come back online. The body has been running in a state of neurological emergency for the duration. When the drug clears, the fatigue that was chemically suppressed arrives all at once. The berserkers who couldn't be killed by sword wounds lay down after the battle and couldn't move for a day. Scopolamine and Hyoscyamine explain this completely. Magic mushrooms do not. How long did it take to lose this knowledge? Not long. In the context of European history, the suppression of Henbane knowledge happened fast. The Reinheitsgebot was 1516, the major European witch trials that specifically targeted women with knowledge of psychoactive plant preparations, flying ointments, ritual substances. The exact knowledge base that the Völva network represented peaked in the 16th and 17th centuries, the same era. The women who knew what the seeds in the copper pot did, who knew which preparation method produced which effect at which dose, who maintained the practical pharmacological knowledge of the Solanaceae family across generations of ritual practice. Those women were being executed across Europe at exactly the moment the beer ban removed Henbane from the one other social context where its effects were publicly visible and publicly known. By the time historians got around to asking what made berserkers berserk, the knowledge had been gone for 2 centuries. The mushroom theory appeared to fill the void in 1784, and it looked right because no one who repeated it knew enough pharmacology or archaeology to check. The plant didn't disappear entirely, though. The alkaloids did what all useful chemistry eventually does. They survived through medicine. Scopolamine, one of the 2 primary alkaloids from Hyoscyamine, is now FDA-approved as a prescription transdermal patch, called Transderm Scop, used for motion sickness, used as pre-surgical sedation, available at pharmacies. The active compound from the berserker weed, administered by Viking priestesses before the bloodiest battles of the early medieval period, now comes in a small adhesive patch for people who get seasick on cruise ships. The discontinuity between those 2 applications is one of the genuinely strange facts of pharmaceutical history. Same molecule, different delivery system, drastically different context. Why this matters? It matters for the same reason every buried history matters. Because the version we believed was not only wrong, it was wrong in a way that made the actual story invisible. The magic mushroom theory made the berserkers seem mystical, exotic, inaccessible to historical analysis, something from a more primitive and spiritually connected time that we couldn't fully understand. It placed the berserker phenomenon into the category of things about the past that are romantic but ultimately unknowable. And that category is comfortable. It doesn't require us to examine the actual human systems, the social, the botanical, the military, the ritual, that produced one of the most documented examples of battlefield pharmacology in pre-modern history. The Henbane theory does require that examination, and what it reveals, when examined, is not primitive, not mystical. It is sophisticated, systematic, based on empirical knowledge developed across generations and administered by skilled practitioners who occupied a specific and high-status social role. The Völva wasn't guessing about the seeds in her pouch. She knew the knowledge had been refined enough that she could produce a specific effect: combat rage with pain tolerance, without sedation, with a predictable recovery window, reliably enough that Viking military commanders incorporated it into their tactical planning. This is applied pharmacology, practiced without journals, without degrees, without peer review, but with enough operational competence to shape the outcomes of battles in the early medieval period. Sumne. The plant is a weed. The practitioner was a woman with a staff and a leather pouch. The warriors were men who couldn't stop until the chemistry wore off. And for roughly 240 years, everyone looking for the explanation was staring at a mushroom. The ditchweed was the secret the whole time. Just like it's always the thing nobody's looking at that ends up being the answer. Now here's what I genuinely want to know from you. Does this change how you see the Völva? She was the most tactically important person on the battlefield, and she never picked up a weapon. Is that power, or is that something else? Tell me. And if you know someone who still believes it was the mushroom, this video is something they need to see. Share it, and let the archaeology speak for itself.